welcome to this special edition of the Way to Wow shows. I'm your host, Kevin Bemel, and today is Independence Day, otherwise known as the 4th of July here in the United States of America. And in recognition of the holiday, I decided to have this uh, special episode to talk for a few minutes about the Declaration of Independence, which is the document that essentially created the United States, and to give us an opportunity to add some meaning to a day that otherwise, it seems to be filled with barbecues and fireworks displays and those sort of things. And of course, those are all fine things, especially spending them with family and friends. I think it's incumbent upon us, though, to remember what this day means in not just the history of our country, but for us in the present day. So I know when I woke up this morning and I slept in a little bit because I stayed up late last night. My first thought was I want to put up my flag outside in honor of this American holiday. So I got a really nice flag from from these folks, and I can't remember their name, but it's all made in America. It's beautiful. The wood for the flagpole is beautiful, and it has special attachments to the pole so it won't get all wrapped around and all that kind of thing. I really, it was a very special thing to carry the flag outside and put it in the bracket that I have on my fence. So the Declaration of Independence, as I mentioned, is essentially the founding document for the United States of America. Now, if you've ever seen the show 1776, a marvelous show, by the way, it essentially recreates the events surrounding the writing and publishing of the Declaration of Independence. However, it's not completely historically accurate. So the what happened was the John Adams primarily, along with his allies, was pressing for the colonies to become an independent country. And he was being stymied by some of the more conservative members of the Continental Congress. And so what he and his allies decided to do, was to get one of the delegates from Virginia, which at the time was really the most influential state or I should say colony, in North America, to get a declaration of independence, or to make a motion that a Declaration of Independence be written, from the House of Burgesses in Virginia. And so Richard Henry Lee rides off, and he, there's a very funny song in 1776 about it, but he is one of the first families of Virginia, very influential. And indeed, he brings back this sort of order, if you will, from the House of Burgesses, that there be a vote on independence. And in the meantime, Thomas Jefferson, who was, if not the youngest, one of the youngest members of the Congress, is engaged to write a Declaration of Independence, setting out to the world why the colonies were taking this unprecedented step. And so, and Thomas Jefferson was widely thought to be the most eloquent writer among the statesmen of the colonies. Although Benjamin Franklin was known for writing, among other things, Poor Richard's Almanac, which was an extremely popular book at the time. Most of it is, again, I'm referring to 1776, was light extemporanea, as they call it in the show. He wrote, humorous things, and nothing that was meant to sort of, stand the test of time. And so the result of Thomas Jefferson's writing was this document that then was debated in the Continental Congress, and some changes were made, and certain parts were deleted until eventually they got to a document that could be voted on, and that was really the seminal moment. So some of the colonies were still holding out. Some of the colonies or some of the delegates were waiting for instructions from their colonial governments, and in the end, um, 12 of the 13 colonies voted in favor of independence, with one essentially abstaining. And then, all eyes kind of turned to those delegates who decided to vote in favor of independence. And one delegate in particular, Dickinson, who was from, I believe, South Carolina, um, believed at the time that declaring independence was absolutely the wrong thing to do. Having been outvoted, though, by the other delegates from his state, as well as the Congress in general, Dickinson made a very short but touching speech, essentially saying, although I disagree with what's happened here today, nonetheless, I'm going to leave Congress now and go join the armed forces of my colony to fight on behalf of this cause. The reason I highlight this is I think we could agree that um, there's probably hasn't been a bigger difference of opinion among American politicians than whether to create our country or not. And here's a man who essentially lost that debate, and he was nonetheless willing to, having been outvoted, nonetheless was dedicated the rest of his life to the support of the cause. And so I think that there's an archetype there for us in how we might consider behaving as Americans. So what I have here before I go to the next part of the show are several books that I think really every American should have. One is this is just a small book, and you can see that it has in it the Constitution of the United States, the Declaration of Independence, and the Articles of Confederation. So the Articles of Confederation predated the Declaration of Independence, and in fact, one of the reasons why the Continental Congress convened was because they found that the Articles of Confederation were not sufficient for creating the kind of unity that the colonies needed in dealing with Great Britain. And so then that led to the Declaration of Independence. And then, of course, after America won the Revolutionary War, the War for Independence, there was a constitutional Congress at which the Constitution was written, debated, and sent to the various colonial state governments, I should say, at that point for a vote of ratification. So these three documents really define the fundamental ideas behind the founding of this country. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to read and know about these documents. So I'll put a link to this book in the show notes after the show posts on our YouTube channel. And like all the links I do, there are affiliate links to Amazon. And so, I get, I think, 2 cents if you buy the book. So, full disclosure. The other very important set of documents in the founding of the United States is something called the Federalist Papers. So they were written by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay. And the Federalist Papers described the ideas and intent behind the Constitution. So when we talk about the constitutional debates and what the founders really intended by any particular part of the Constitution, many of those answers are in this book, and it's an indispensable guide for really understanding what the Constitution is all about. Now, of course, in this country, there's essentially a partisan divide over the Constitution. People on the right tend to have a strict constructionist, or at least a originalist interpretation of the Constitution, meaning meaning that they don't believe that the Constitution changes over time, that its original intent is what's important. And so when a particular issue comes up, it needs to be examined in light of what the framers of the Constitution intended. And then there's the left side of the political spectrum, which has more of what's called a living constitution, constitutional interpretation, meaning that over time, how the Constitution is interpreted has to change and grow to be reflective of the time in which a particular issue is being examined. And while one could argue I'm being somewhat oversimplified in these explanations, just in a short way, that's really what the philosophical divide is in this country between left and right. So again, I'll put a link to this book in the show notes as well. And then the final book that I recommend is something called The American Reader. It's edited by Diane Ravitch. And this book contains all of the documents, poems, and other writings that really help us understand what the United States is all about. So just to give you an idea, it starts with the Mayflower Compact in 1620 or thereabouts. Okay. And then it has other things like George Washington's farewell address. And then it goes through to, it has the poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas, right? And you say, what does that have to do with the United States? Well, let's be honest. The United States was founded by Christians. And so there is a Christian history to this country. And then it goes on through many famous writers that you probably heard about, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, including his poem, Paul Revere's Ride, which documents the famous ride of Paul Revere, although, again, it's not historically accurate. Emily Dickinson is in here. William Lloyd Garrison, the famous slavery abolitionist. Frederick Douglass, also one of the famous Black abolitionist, and extremely important to that movement. Abraham Lincoln's The House Divided speech. So on and on and on, and it kind of goes era by era in the country. And it's very inspiring. It's a very inspiring book to read. And I know that sometimes I get somewhat pessimistic about the fate of our country with all of the divisions and then the violence and the overheated rhetoric. And I'll pick up Miss Ravitch's book and thumb through it and pick some things to read. And it renews my faith in this country. As this year we celebrate our 248th anniversary. So we're heading in a couple of years, we'll be celebrating the 250th anniversary of our country. We are on the world stage, a fairly young country. Countries like England, France are much older than we are. Other countries are younger. Germany is younger. Italy is younger. And of course, there's countries even younger than that. But Spain is a much older country than we are. Portugal is a much older country than we are. China is a much older country than we are. So on the world stage, I think we're kind of on the younger side, perhaps, of middle age. And how long will, as we call it, the Great American Experience last? Very, very hard to say. But I think it will last as long as we Americans have faith in our country and do our best to work together as citizens in a unified cause. So my practice on Independence Day is to read the Declaration of Independence, which, as I was saying at the beginning, is the document that created this country, and it was published on this date 248 years ago, and it really puts forth the fundamental ideals behind why the United States of America was created. And so, for the rest of this show, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to read the Declaration of Independence, and I hope that you will stay with me. It won't take a very long time, and I intend to make it as dramatic and impactful as I can. But again, I think it's incumbent on us once a year to review this document and really understand the foundations of this foundational document of our country. And so here we go. The unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind require that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter the former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance, unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained. And when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend to them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time after such dissolutions to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise. The state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states, for that purpose obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. He has affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation. For quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us in many cases of the benefit of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses, for abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies, for taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our governments, for suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny already begun, with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation. He has constrained our fellow citizens, taking captive on the high seas, to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. He has excited domestic insurrections among us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of war is undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our emigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and of consanguinity. We must, therefore, acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation and hold them as we hold the rest of mankind. Enemies in war, in peace, friends. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, and with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. So we can see that our founders took the idea behind creating the United States of America very seriously. They gave tremendous thought to it. They argued, they fought, and in the end, they came to an agreement. They didn't create a perfect country. It was flawed from the beginning. It continues to have flaws now. And we, their inheritors, have the responsibility to make our country ever better. And so on this Independence Day, the 4th of July, 2024, I ask you to take just a moment to think about how you can make our country a better place for everyone, not just the people with whom you agree, not just for your family and friends, but for everyone. And I wish you a very meaningful and happy day. So thank you so much for joining me on this special edition of the Way to Wow shows. Wishing you, signing off as I always do, Marie, darling, you are my inspiration and my bell. And wishing all of you that you will have courage at all times. Thank you so much.